Hey everyone, today Max and Maury and I are going to talk about the compressed skill gap in Call of Duty. Thank you for joining us. The other day I saw a video about Call of Duty's compressed skill gap in quotes and how it's ruining other games because everyone wants first person shooters to feel like Call of Duty. This got me thinking, did he have a point? And I'm going to address that in this video. There are three main questions to ask when it comes to Call of Duty and its compressed skill gap. And those are, what is a compressed skill gap? Does Call of Duty have a compressed skill gap? And finally, what are the ramifications of COD having a compressed skill gap, if indeed it does have one? So first we need to know what a skill gap is, and then we can talk about what a compressed skill gap is. So, what is a skill gap? A skill gap is simply the difference in gaming ability between one player and another. When you play with the same group of people for a long time, you'll become intimately familiar with where you rate on the totem pole compared to the other players, and then the skill gap will become kind of obvious. So when I used to play Modern Warfare 2 with a bunch of the same people almost every night, and I got to know the skill level of those players, and so when I bested someone who I usually trailed, I was happy. But when I did more poorly than someone that I usually was better than, I was not so happy. So that's the skill gap in action, and there's always a skill gap between you and other players. It could be big or small, and positive or negative, and hopefully it's positive, but often it's negative, which is never fun. So that's a skill gap. What's a compressed skill gap? Well, every game has its own set of skills to master to become good at that game. So if you're playing tic-tac-toe, you only have to learn a few basic rules to make sure you don't lose. But if you're playing chess, then not only do you need to learn all the possible moves of each little piece, but you need to learn a metric ton full of strategies and tactics to be able to master them, and in order to do well. So let's say you have to master, 10 rules or tactics or whatever to be a tic-tac-toe champion, but you have to master 1,000 rules and strategies and tactics or whatever to beat Bobby Fischer, In this case, tic-tac-toe has a compressed skill gap compared to chess. 10 rules versus like 1,000 or more or whatever. And chess has an expanded skill gap compared to tic-tac-toe, 1,000 versus 10. So let's pretend we live in a world of doped up potheads who could only think of one game. Beer pong. If beer pong were the only game in existence, would it have a compressed skill gap? Well, no. The answer is no way, dude. Because a game can only have a compressed skill gap when compared to another game. It can't have one all by itself. To say a game has a compressed skill gap comes directly from having compared it to another game. So this brings up the next major question. Does Call of Duty have a compressed skill gap? If someone asked you this question, what would your response have to be? Remember the potheads playing beer pong? They'd say, "What you talking about, Willis?" Because they don't have any game to compare beer pong to. We, on the other hand, live in a world of many games, so our response would have to be, compared to what? Before I go any further, I have to focus our conversation a little bit. Let's forget about tic-tac-toe and chess and beer pong, though the same principles apply. We talk about first-person shooters now. Because you could argue that tic-tac-toe played with X's and O's versus tic-tac-toe played with squares and triangles are two different games technically. And I don't really want to get into silly arguments like that because it's unproductive and frankly very frustrating. So let's just say that we're talking about actual first-person shooters available now to help us focus our thoughts. So, first-person shooters. Every single first-person shooter has a compressed or expanded skill gap compared to every other one. If you compared any two games, one will require more skill than the other. It might not be much more skill to the point where you could hardly discern it, but I doubt that anyone would be foolish enough to claim that there are two different first-person shooter games out there with exactly the same set of skills required to achieve a certain level of proficiency. And even if by some random act of Zeus there was such a case, I'm going to ignore it because the probability of that is just so low. So when comparing any two games, one will have a compressed skill gap compared to the other, or you could inversely say that one has an expanded skill gap compared to the other. Two sides of the same coin. So, does Call of Duty have a compressed skill gap? Of course it does, if you compare it to a game of higher difficulty. But get this, so does every other FPS you care to mention. Well, except for one of course, the most difficult FPS in existence. And I have no idea which one that is, so let's just say that it's, I don't know, Chex Quest, and ignore it from here on out. So every single first-person shooter has a compressed skill gap because you can compare it to a game that's of higher difficulty. So every game has a compressed skill gap if you look at it that way. But I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Henry, my man, we're not arguing that games don't have a compressed skill gap. We're just saying that Call of Duty is the worst offender out there of all the first-person shooters out there. It has a highly compressed skill gap compared to any other first-person shooter out there, be it Halo or Battlefield or Destiny or that new fellow Overwatch. And to that I say, fair enough. That might be true, and it might not be true. You might be disappointed to hear that I'm not going to argue that point here. Maybe that can be the subject of another video, or for Drifter. Why? Because it doesn't matter for the last and third big question, which is coming up right now. And here it is. What are the ramifications of COD having a compressed skill gap? And by compressed skill gap, we have now learned that people actually mean the most compressed skill gap compared to other first-person shooter games on the market in recent memory. Let's just pretend that this is true, and that Call of Duty does indeed have a very compressed skill gap compared to other games. Because if it's false, which is actually quite arguable, in my humble opinion, then we could just stop right here, my video would be too short, and that wouldn't be fun. So let's just pretend it's true. So, Call of Duty has a compressed skill gap. Other game manufacturers who wish to make games that require more skill to master are having problems selling these games because nobody wants them. Call of Duty players have spoiled the market for any other kind of game because they want easy-to-play games and will reject games that don't feel like Call of Duty. And because Call of Duty is the #1 first-person shooter and its influence on the player base is so huge, it's not like there are a ton of players who haven't played COD and who don't have that COD bias. So this is the argument that some people are making, and again, let's assume it's true because again, no fun otherwise. Here is my response. Here it is. Tough titties. Who cares? I'll let you in on a few facts. 1. It's a free world. Activision can release whatever kind of game they want, and people can buy whatever kind of game they want. To whine about buying habits of the gaming masses is just as pointless as complaining about the Maple Leafs' inability to win the Stanley Cup. It's a fact of life. Deal with it. 2. Everything is cyclical. Call of Duty won't be the king of the hill forever. Eventually something will dethrone it. If you don't like COD, well then buy something else. Eventually buying something else will add up to people not buying COD. And if Activision keeps on screwing up like people think they're doing with Infinite Warfare, then even COD will die sooner rather than later. Lastly, if you want to make an FPS today, you need to make something so good, so compelling, so enticing, it'll force people to pay attention. And you have to know that you're taking a huge risk going up against COD because it's highly likely that COD will squish your FPS like a sumo wrestler on custard pie. People in our society make products that fail every single day. Why should gaming be any different? We live in a free market, a capitalist society, and that's just the way it is. Don't whine when your souffle falls. Make another one or get out of the kitchen. I'm done. That's all I really wanted to say about the compressed skill gap issue. To summarize, COD has a compressed skill gap, sure, maybe, but so does every other game. COD might have a hugely compressed skill gap compared to other games, but, you know, that's life. Get over it. I know this video was kind of different than other videos I've made, and I appreciate it very, very much that you're here to the very end of it, still listening to me rambling on about this issue. So thank you again. If you liked what you heard, can you please give this video a like and maybe share it with some others? I really appreciate it. And I'll see you guys next time. This is Henry, over and out.